Hey guys, so today we're going to be looking at specifically adding power-ups and things to our little ball game, and this is, as I say many other times with just reiterating many things when you practice programming, is to add specific features and be able to now, in this case, edit the components that we've got in our trigger event, for example, and add little special power-ups and events that we want to be able to create. So in this case, we're going to want to edit the speed and the jump force. So we're going to go into a collision event, and then it's going to affect the speed and the jump force, and then from there we will maybe wait a few seconds and then have it turn back to the normal rate that which we normally had. So there's a few things that we're going to need to do. We'll want a set of different variables for the normal speed and the affected speed, and then to be able to change that however we want when we go into our little collisions. So in our player controller script we have a speed and a jump force, but we want to be able to those to be specifically affected. So what we want to do is, in this case, we don't want these to be private anymore because we want them to be accessed elsewhere. So we'll call this public integer speed, and we'll change this one to public integer jump force. Another public integer, and this is going to be norm speed, and a public integer which is going to be normal jump force, like so, because these are going to be our two variables which are going to be always the same. When we're normally moving around, we'll set the actual speed to what we want. So in this case, because speed is a particular value, that's all okay, and we can affect things there. And what we can do is go to our trigger event script, and we can write something else within our trigger event. We could write else if, and we could do like we've done before, other.compare tag in quotes, in brackets, in quotes, player, and then we could create another, and we could say and because we're going to look for the boolean. And the other boolean that we could create, we'll say serialize field private bool, and we'll say this, let's say speed boost, so we know specifically what we're going to do. And we could do another serialize field private bool, and we could call this jump boost, so we know exactly what we're going to do at any one time. So if we go into the trigger and it's a speed boost trigger, then what we'll do is we'll make sure we close up our brackets and add two curly brackets left and right facing. And then what we can do is we can do something here. So if it's a speed boost, we specifically want to say and access our player controller script. So up here we could create a new reference to it. So we could say serialize field private player controller, because we want to access the components there, and call this my player controller with a semicolon. And in here we want to be able to say that we want to affect those variables that we created in here, the normal, just the basic speed and force, because we can set them back to normal when we need to. And we can pretty much say it along the lines of my player controller dot speed at this moment when we enter this collision is going to be, we could say, our boosted speed. We haven't created that variable yet, but we can do. So we could create this variable in this script, or we could create it in our player controller if all the actual objects are going to have the same boost depending on what we go on. But let's say, for instance, that we want it to be specific to this actual trigger script itself. So we could write another serialize field and say private integer boosted speed, and we'll be able to set it on a trigger by trigger basis, so each trigger could have a slightly different amount. It's really dependent on what you want to do specifically. So again, we could do this again, serialize field in square brackets private integer, and we just call this boosted jump, for instance, just to keep it coherent. So we have it like that. And again, we could have another else if statement and say other dot compare tag just like before in brackets quotes player. Then we'll say inside the quotes and jump boost, close that brackets, two below, and say my player controller dot jump force is equal to the boosted jump. So essentially, this is all we need to do to be able to affect the actual variables we've got, and as soon as we enter that collider, it will change the speed and the jump force to something that we want. So what we'll do is we'll go back into Unity again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a duplication of my red cube that I've got here that does damage. So I'll duplicate my red cube, and I'm going to put it back here, and I'm going to duplicate that again, and I'll put it just over here as a pure example. I'm going to create a new empty game object, and we'll set this with its transforms, reset them, and I'm going to rename this to our Powerup controller or something like that, so we know what these objects are going to be. So I'll select these two objects and I will just place them in here just so that I can see those specifically. I will change this red cube to speed boost and this one to jump boost, so we know exactly what our objects are going to be. So we can open those up and you can see that there's two triggers and it's got the same script on, and that's perfect. We can call this speed trigger and this one jump trigger, and all I've done is this is just a duplication or something with a box collider with our block trigger script on it. So seeing as though this one is our speed boost, what we can do is I might create a brand new material, and I will do that. I will just duplicate my current material, which was the red material for my cube, and I'll make this for the speed one. I will make it yellow, and I will get the color picker and just select over that yellow again just so it's consistent, and then add that to my object there. And I could make a duplicate of the yellow and maybe have this as purple, something like that, and I will select a purple here. So now my yellow's for speed and my purple is for blue, and you could even name these specific to what you want so you know. But in this case you can see that for my block trigger I need my player controller script or my player controller game object adding. So what I can do is I can just add my player to that slot. I can select my jump trigger and do the same, add the player to that slot. And then with my speed trigger, what I can do is we can say that we don't want it to be a damage one anymore. We can say this is going to be a speed boost object. We'll say that the boosted speed is going to be something that we want. So if we go back to our player and we see that the speed that we start is 10 and the jump force is 250, we'll say that normal speed is the same, it's going to be 10, and jump speed is going to 250, because these are the two variables that we're going to change. We're not going to change the normal values because we can set these two to the normal values when we need to, if we don't want to do the effect anymore. So if we go back to our speed trigger again, we can say that boosted speed is going to be something more than 10. Well, we could so for the sake of this we could say 35, and for the jump force we could say 500, and I will do the same for each in case we want to make any changes. So 35 and 500, and for the purple one we're going to untick damage and we're going to call this a jump. So now everything's set up and ready to go. We'll save our scene, we'll press play, and we can see that when we're playing the game we can move around at a normal sort of value, and if we go inside this trigger we can see that my speed is significantly increased, so I can bounce across the walls and everything like that. And you can see that my jump is around that value, so I can't particularly jump very high. So if I can go back into this trigger, we can now see I can jump much further than I ever could before, and I jump straight out of the world, and away we go. With these two easy additions, we just added a couple more if statements to our boolean just to keep it so that when we do it we're checking to see if it's any of these at any one time, and it only checks once. And we use the else if because they're a connection of each other. We're checking different elements of the same piece. We're changing the actual original variable in here, these two, and then in the next video I will show you how to create a timer and adjust variables back to the original thing, and how we should adjust the theory, just so this video doesn't end up being too long, because it's just a nice way to affect the components. And depending if you went into another power up you could reduce the speed back down. It depends what sort of functionality you're looking for, but if you want to do it on a timer, that's what I'll do in the next one. So thanks very much for watching, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.